All right. Looks like we're ready to start. A quorum of the, oh, sorry. How many times? There. Now we're official. A quorum of the Ordinance Committee being here, we will conduct a public hearing to discuss the zoning petition filed by Stephen R. Karp, trustee of Cambridgeside Galleria Trust, to add a new section 13.100 to Article 13 and amend the zoning map to add a new PUD and district overlay. The hearing is being audio and video recorded, both privately and by city. And there are attendee and speaker sign-up sheets by the podium in the back. If you don't want to speak, you can still sign in. If you want to speak, please indicate that you do when you sign up. If you have public comments that you have written, that would be great if you could leave them in the box there or email them to the city clerk at dlopez@cambridgema.gov. The format of the hearing will be that the petitioners will be heard first, followed by city staff and public comment. Members of the council will get to ask clarifying questions of both the petitioners and city staff. And then after public comment is closed, we will have a discussion amongst city councilors, again with questions to either the petitioners or city staff. At the end of this hearing, we will make a recommendation to keep it in committee, to advance it, or to do something else. So, with that being said, unless there are questions or comments from any of my peers, and seeing none, I will turn it over to the petitioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Rich McKinnon. I'm the development consultant for the petitioner, and I live at 1 Layton Street in Cambridge. I want to thank the chairman, Chairman Colon, and members of the Ordinance Committee for scheduling the hearing. This is a big night for us. A lot of work's gone into getting to this point, and I wonder if I might just introduce the members of the team before we begin. From New England Development, to my left, John Tuhig, Steve Karp, and I think Sarah Lemke is behind me. And then from our architectural firm, David Manfredi from Elkis Manfredi, and behind me are Brian Rossler and Ernie Milani. And then from our legal firm, Goulston and Stores, Tim Sullivan, and Jessica Camano. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our owner, Steve Karp.
Okay, thank you. I'll press the button, that'll help. Well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to come back here again and be able to talk to you. It's been so many years since we first had the original meeting, and this is kind of a picture they found and put together of opening day. And I don't have to tell you that we don't have crowds like that anymore, nor do people dress like that. And time has changed, and they put Fellines up there, and Fellines has disappeared too. So there's been a lot of change that started. And on the next slide, when we first looked at the site, and some of you probably remember, it was a field of parking lots and industrial buildings, and the original Lechmere that was at 88 First Street and became famous with the 88 as their logo or slogan or whatever. One of the things that they told me, this was the original picture, and and as I looked at it closely, I think I built a temporary garage to keep Lechmere in business while we were doing this, and I think that may be the temporary garage, not an industrial building. So we did acquire multiple parcels in order to put the entire project together. And in the 1987 plan that we had, we gave the land to the city to construct Charles Park and to complete the Lechmere Canal building. Some of the land along the canal was part of the original assemblage that I did, and obviously the park was part of it, as was the Lotus office building parcel. We did provide, as part of the plan and working with the city, and Cambridgeside Place, which actually separated the parcel that we put together, but it was like a continuation of Charles Street, so there was access to the Charles River and across the street, and it was connecting to the Edward Land Boulevards. So that was part of the accumulation of different parcels that were put together in the original plan. And I don't have to tell anybody in this room that the way people shop, work, and live today is changing. And so we realize Cambridgeside has to change. And in 2017, Credit Suisse did a forecast that 1 in 4 malls could close by 2022. And just today, I heard that the Swansea Mall, which was a 3-department store mall that was built in the same era, I think, is not only closed, every tenant has moved out, and it's going up for auction. So the world is changing, and it's changing quickly, and survival is a must for us. So e-commerce is growing. Department store sales are declining. You can see the way the red is going up, and that's e-commerce, and department store sales are going in the opposite direction. And in addition to the competition of e-commerce for retail sales, Assembly Row has also had a big impact on Cambridgeside. The fact that it's a mixed-use project and has a lot of density, but also outlets. And some of the stores that were originally in Cambridgeside, like J. Crew and The Gap and a number of other stores have opened outlet stores there. That's had a big impact on the sales at the Cambridgeside Galleria. And the trend is accelerating. Hundreds of millions of square feet are going dark. I won't go through every detail of the graph, but it's obvious that that's a trend. That's a trend that's continuing, and it's a trend that's going at a faster pace than it ever has before. Cambridgeside has started to change, and we've been concerned about this for almost a decade now and been looking at ways in order to do things. You are familiar with the 3rd floor because you were very much a part of making it happen. This will give you an idea of what it's going to look like when we get the 3rd floor done. That was our first step. We had spent $35 million renovating the mall to kind of keep it current. Unfortunately, the retail sales didn't keep up with the improvements that we made, and so the change was inevitable that we needed to make a mixed-use complex so that we can have the traffic that can make the retail vital forever, and that's a critical part of what we're trying to do. So where do we go from here? Well, our goal is to remain a valuable and vibrant neighbor to the city, but to in East Cambridge in particular. We support our retail core of over 90 tenants, which is critical, and we activate First Street and the canal with retail and restaurants, which David Manfredi will go over when he goes over the plans with you. We're going to show you the plan there of where the core of the mall is that we're retaining and where the other properties where the anchor department stores were, which was part of the presentation that David will make to you today. We're mixing the uses to support the tenants, and similar to other mixed-use projects, the fact that there will be people there every single day that will be eating and shopping and being involved in the vitality of the complex, including some people living there, is an important part of making it for the next 30 years successful. We're going to promote pedestrian and bicycle safety, and that'll be part of our presentation. We talk about the cycle track and things that we're going to be able to do. That's the beginning of something that I think will probably end up being continued in other parts of Cambridge. We'll maintain and strengthen the connections between the East Cambridge neighborhood and the riverfront. But we have some challenges, and we have these, I guess, challenges together. We have to relocate first and second and third floor tenants, which sounds like it's an easy thing to do, but it's very hard to redevelop a place when you have leases in place You have fixed situations. People don't realize how difficult it is to load a place like this, and the loading courts are critical to making it happen. And we have to make sure that continues while we're building around it. We have to prepare for the anchor stores to be replaced over a period of time. It's not going to all happen at once, because we're going to move the tenants that are in some of those buildings into other locations so that they can continue, and some of them won't be able to continue and exist in the future because things are just changing. We'll maintain public access to a safe, secure, and functioning mall while constructing these buildings, and we'll keep the underground garage in place, and that's critical, but that's a construction nightmare. And trying to build over some of those garages when you realize that we're actually building below the Charles River, and the construction is it's not only difficult, but will take a lot of ingenuity, and that's something that we're working on. We'll offset stagnant retail rents with sufficient and diverse new mixed-use development. And one of the things that I like to think of is that we're taking the retail that was on the third floor and we're moving it to First Street and activating First Street, so that it won't be a one-to-one change, but I think it'll be a valuable change for us and for the city. It'll be an important change. And so we're concerned about our operating costs, and when you operate a mall and you're operating a mall with 2 levels of retail, it's complicated, and the common area costs are difficult for the tenants to absorb, and it's expensive taxes in an urban environment, and just operating in an urban facility. So it's something that we have to take in consideration in negotiating new leases with some of the tenants that we're moving around, because we want to keep them in the mall. And the challenge to us is to keep the mall vibrant, to keep retail as a core. We think it's critical to the rest of the development, not only as part of the Cambridge side project, but also of the whole First Street all the way from one end to the other as it gets, the new Leechmere Station is built, and other development has taken place in Cambridge Center and down to Kendall Square. So this isn't exact science, and it's complicated. So I think that we're going to have a lot of discussion. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions, but I think I'd like to turn it over to John Tooth, on my right, who's going to tell us a little bit how we can get there.
Thanks, Steve. I get the unenviable position of how do you explain a zoning text, which is a lot of words, and try to do that from a...
Could you make sure you're using...
Okay, all right, there we go. Rich tricked me by shutting it off. I was saying, the task is try to talk about a zoning change, and 13 or 14 pages of words, and try to make that interesting, and so that we can talk about it. Because as Steve mentioned, it is complicated, but the 2 things he sort of charged us with. Okay, we have this goal. We've identified the challenges. Now, what do we need to do? We need to develop a zoning bylaw that actually will allow us to do some of the mixed use that the project can be, and to deal with the fact that I don't think it's any secret. When Sears announced they were closing, they wouldn't even say open to Christmas. They were closed on December 9th. We got that as a surprise phone call one day. That's 140,000 square feet of the mall. The future of the anchors, when you look at the economic graph, it's pretty clear. The changes that are going on, give you a sense. There's $120 billion of sales in 2017 in e-commerce, and on the side of the department stores has gone from 60 billion to 40 billion in the same time frame. It's just they crossed about 2011. But not to focus on that, but just to realize how do you develop a zoning that's going to work. The other thing is how do you develop a design. that fits in with a lot of the great planning that went on 30 years ago, Councilor Carlone and others that were involved in it. So the two parts we'd like to focus on now is talk a little bit about the zoning and then talk about design, and David will take you through that. What are we going to talk about in zoning? You have a very good memo that the CDD did that sort of went through the zoning and took it apart, and we're going to actually include one of the charts that they did. We think that's very helpful. We certainly can't go through in the time that we have all of the zoning, but we thought we'd hit 4 or 5 major points. Where is it? What is that new district? How do you get into that district? How do you have an opportunity to be able to utilize the zoning that we're presenting to you? What's the process for that new zoning? Because as we all know, it's a process that is really twofold. It starts here in ordinance to actually kind of create what I like to call the rules of the road. But then when that's all done, we don't actually have a right to do anything. We have to start with a special permit. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to touch for a minute on how PUD 8, which is what the proposal is, that's what we filed with you, how it relates to what exists today in the PUD 4. So you get a little bit of a sense of, what are you guys doing and how does it relate? And then why should you support it in the sense of, how does this zoning petition, how does this PUD 8 match up with the city's goals? So that's what I'll try to very briefly walk through. So you see, David gets the really sexy part and the pretty pictures, and I get words, but we'll try to see what we can do. Where is it? By frame of reference, it's the core retail. It's the Sears building. It's the upper parking garage. It's the Lechmere, and yes, we are all dating ourselves when we talk about the Lechmere, but it's the Lechmere, and for newer folks in the room, the Best Buy, and then the Macy's. That's really what the core is. Today, it's about 8 acres. When Steve did the project originally, it was a little bit larger than that, had Lotus, had a lot of the public spaces in it that were technically included within it. But that's really, the PUD 8 really focuses on the area that is shaded up on the screen. So how do you qualify for it? Well, one of the things we heard when we talked to people about the zoning was we really want the core retail, which is, we like to say Cambridge side is a great gathering spot. It's a place that matters a great deal to the people in Cambridge. We want to be sure that that core retail experience, the restaurant experience stays. So one of the basic tenets we said was, well, okay, that ground floor has got to maintain, if you're going to try to use this zoning, at least 100,000 square feet of retail and restaurant space. So that space is core to the very essence of any development that's here. Secondly, it's got to be a parcel of size. So we're putting it 7.5 acres. So it's a development that's got to have that kind of size. And it's got to be proximate to and connected to the public open space, whether it be Charles Park or the canal. I think there's a lot of pride in Cambridge side is very different. And David will talk a little bit about it. The center core and the atrium, we have over 200,000 square feet of space that is open and available to the public. That's a very different layout than you'll find in most any other center anywhere in the country. So what's the process? I touched on it just for a minute. Obviously, the adoption, we're going to ask you to consider our PUD 8, the petition that Steve filed, but also the special permit application. There's a lot of words up there, and there's a lot of things that have to be filed. And I am going to touch on them a little bit because we changed them from what was included effectively in your base zoning. This is a very important site. We want to be sure that whenever we come in and ask for the special permit to be able to do what David is going to show you, that we have the detail to show you, the massing, architectural character. As Steve mentioned, the importance of connectivity. We heard that all throughout the neighborhood. How does it connect to the open space, to the canal, to the Charles River? How can we perhaps move across the street? What the ground floor activation is. Everyone, and David will speak to it in more detail, talked about First Street. The mall sort of turns its back to the neighborhood. What are you going to do about that? We don't want a proposal that comes forward that doesn't address that issue. Housing. Housing 30 years ago was not something that was a focal point. It certainly is today. Phasing. How can it be built? Parking, loading, and transportation. When we talk about the upper parking garage coming down, but we're also maintaining 1,700 spaces underground as part of the project. So how does that all work, and how's that all going to be shared parking, and how's it going to support what we're proposing to build? Sustainability, again, something we didn't focus on 30 years ago, but the sustainable nature of the facility, its resiliency and climate change, that has to be an important part of whatever gets filed. So those are some of the things that are really associated with the process. So we sort of showed you, where it is, how you get into it, and then if you want to move forward, what do you have to file? The fourth thing that would show you in zoning, and again, this is coupled somewhat with the memo that CDD put together, is how does it compare? And this is a chart actually out of the report that you have from staff. In many ways, the allowed uses are very much the same. I think we added the reference to light industry as an opportunity, which somewhat relates to the definition of what different businesses do today. Even an Amazon sometimes is considered a light industry. The floor area is 766,000 square feet today. That's smaller than what was in the original filing, and we did add a footnote to the chart. It does exclude the existing parking garage. I think if you look back at the old materials and what we're talking, it's about 1,000,001 square feet. We're talking about a net new add of 625,000 square feet, which is really focused in the anchors. Minimum residential wasn't in the old PUD4. It is in this. The thought would be 20% of the net new development would be residential. Also, although it's not in this chart, and 20% of that would be affordable. Minimum lot area, again, sort of changing the mixed-use nature. That's a little bit different. Probably one of the other differences, is height. Maximum height on the old project, the old PUD4 is 85 feet. We're proposing 3 levels of height as you step back from the canal, and David will show you that both in model and in plan tonight. 85 feet by the canal, 135 feet stepping back, and then a maximum of 185 feet more out onto Land Boulevard. Setbacks and open space being the same. So again, in the time that we have, in a very thumbnail way, that gives you a sense of how these two things compare, what you approved originally, and we were approval number 66, so it gives you a sense of when it happened, versus what it is today. Why should you support this? How does it meet the planning goals? One of the things that we did before we started, knowing that we wanted to see if we could develop a mixed-use project on this site, was take a look at a lot of the planning studies, riverfront plan, the overall planning studies, the updated riverfront plan, Kendall plans, the Envision Cambridge plans, and sort of looked at, and even in some of the special permit criteria and the plan requirements that I mentioned, they were developed from after reading these studies. And some of David's designs that you'll see were developed from reading these studies. But we developed this set of criteria that any project that we bring forward, and again, we're talking zoning tonight, but part of the zoning is this type of a approval criteria. You have to have a mix of uses. Ground floor retail along First Street, neighborhood connections, high quality streets, strong street edge, and David will show you not only along First Street, but how we have a magnificent opportunity here to take almost 1,600 feet of frontage in Cambridge and activate it. Something very, very different. That's something you don't get in other places or in a one-off building that you might be doing. Architectural nature, consistency, and this was used in commentary about the architectural richness that we have to commit to. Obviously, as I mentioned, sustainability, TDM, which is really transportation demand management. How can we improve the use of pedestrian, bicycles, transit, and then develop real programming for the open space. We do a lot of programming now at Cambridge side. Izzy Shate and his team and others do a lot of programming, but these are things that we have to show you if we're going to be able to utilize this zoning. So what do we do next? As it relates to the zoning, you have a report. We did meet with the planning board. The planning board and some of the planning board members and staff had a lot of comments, probably 10 or 12, some of them technical comments. I listed a few of them here about how does the PUD8 relate to the PUD4, what's an eligible development parcel. We have a provision in there about how special permits lapse. We're going to work with staff in staff in the city to try to address some of those issues so we can come up with a better draft on some of those points. We fully expect we'll have a follow-up meeting, obviously, with the planning board as we move that forward, obviously continuing here in ordinance. And one of the other things in ordinance is the idea of a zoning commitment letter, which we fully expect will be further dialogue on that. And related to that, and this is one of the comments that we got at planning and other places, is what are you starting to envision that commitment letter will include? And these are things that, not necessarily that we came up with, some are, but certainly commentary that we received about local arts, commitment to the arts, and displaying and selling their work. Focus, last time, actually, Rich and I were here in City Council chambers, discussion of the tree fund and the importance of what's going on in Cambridge regarding that. Seasonal farmer market, real programming on the riverfront to be able to provide educational experiences, and Rich has spent some time working with the school department about real experiences on the river for Cambridge youth in a programmed way, in a very effective and committed way. Also, similarly, programs for seniors. So those are the types of things that we're thinking about as we sort of develop a letter going forward. So with that said, and that was sort of a brief sort of walk down the zoning, and again, as I said, you have a report. I think it would be helpful now, we'll sort of talk to, a little bit about the history, some of the challenges that we have, the goals that we had, how we developed the zoning, and now let's sort of get into the design and move that forward and have Dave Manfredi start with that. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Good evening, everybody. I want to start at the highest level and really propose to you that this is an extraordinary opportunity for urban design in the city of Cambridge. What I mean by that is that we can convert really a single-use block of buildings to multiple uses, and I think we all know the benefits of that in terms of liveliness and diversity of guests coming to this block. We can make real improvements to public realm. We can make better connections through this block to the canal and to other important public spaces along the riverfront. And we have the opportunity, and we're going to take advantage of that opportunity to break apart the super block. And I'll show you exactly what we mean by that. So I'm going to start with First Street. As John said, we heard a lot of comments from the neighborhood about First Street. We want to activate First Street with uses that engage pedestrians, engage pedestrians in a regular and consistent kind of way. And in order to do that, we're going to propose to demolish both the upper garage in the middle of the block as well as the Leechmere block. We will demolish those basically to the ground, leaving the parking below grade, and build new buildings on those sites. But those new buildings will have active uses on the ground floor, and we will pull them apart, as I'm about to show you in a moment. And so, to the point of the mix of uses, you can see the Sears building will be converted to retail and commercial uses. The garage will be converted to retail at grade, residential and commercial uses, and the Leechmere building will be converted to retail and commercial uses. That's about 750 feet of frontage along First Street, active along the entire edge. And the thing I will point out is the space between those boxes, those new buildings, will in a way mirror the kind of rhythm that you have on the west side of the street, on the opposite side of the street, where you really have a more walkable rhythm, the kind of original blocks. The other thing I want to point out is that by demolishing the two blocks that are in red, we have the opportunity to double the width of that sidewalk. And so our proposal is to increase those sidewalk dimensions along that entire length. They're today between 10 and 12 feet. We will make them basically 20 to 22 feet in width. That will accommodate not only complete streets and landscape, but also cycle track, walking dimension, and the ability to spill out onto the sidewalk with restaurants. I'll point out to the left on this diagram, you can see in the Sears building, we're proposing to create a new gallery with retail on both sides of it, lobby for the commercial use above, publicly accessible that will go directly into the food court, but also directly to Canal Park. So one of the things we heard was porosity, access to public spaces. So all of this is part of creating a broader network of pedestrian spaces,
of pedestrian paths, put more people in, and really think of the sidewalk as part of the public realm. So on the top you can see this is a plan of First Street today with Sears on the left, the parking garage in the middle, and you'll notice, probably hard to read, but you'll notice a lot of utilities, transformers, all the things that run this building. They'll all be relocated. Best Buy on the right, and you can see the street as it exists today. What we're proposing is that middle block of parking demolished to grade, Leechmere demolished to grade, these buildings pulled apart by 40 feet. So that's the footprint of a building, that's the footprint of a new building, and here's the Sears building. And so that sidewalk, which today is 10 feet, will be 20 to 22 feet. Trees along a landscape zone near the curb, the cycle track, that wide sidewalk, the opportunity for restaurants to spill out onto the sidewalk. This is 700 feet from here to here. It's 500 feet along Cambridge Side Place. And everything you're seeing in this kind of salmon color is all new retail. As Steve said, think of it as taking the retail from the third floor, which is up 40 feet in the air, and bringing it down onto the street. Retail here, access to the lobby of that commercial building. Retail along the street here with access to residential and access to commercial. And then all street-facing retail along basically three sides of the Sears building. What you're looking at there may be hard to distinguish, but those are tables and chairs and umbrellas along that path and along the canal itself. So what you see at the top, obviously, is the street as it exists today. Oops, I did exactly what you told me not to do, John. I pressed it twice because I got impatient. At the top is the street as it exists today, and at the bottom, our vision for what that street can be. What I want to point out is 3 or 4 things. Transparency on the base of these buildings. These are storefronts. The lobbies are made small so that the active uses can be bigger. The sidewalk is wide. There's real opportunity for street trees to grow to maturity. There's a space between buildings, so that's the building on the corner, that's the middle building, that's the Sears building, and there's spaces between these buildings. That retail, restaurants runs the entire 700 feet, and so we have the opportunity to create a really transform First Street, make a pedestrian connection between Kendall Square and Cambridge Crossing, which will really transform this part of the city. And so if you look at it in the broader context, what we're proposing is 3 buildings. We very much want to be consistent in the design and architecture with the original intentions of the riverfront plan, buildings that have a strong base, buildings that have a kind of middle that are brick, masonry, terracotta, and buildings there. There's no all glass buildings here. These are buildings that have materiality. As John pointed out, we've got commercial. The middle block is commercial for retail at the base, and then 4 floors of commercial, and then 125,000 square feet of residential above. We're creating a kind of datum here between 65 and 80 feet that really responds to what's happening across the street, and a real transition, a series of setbacks to those upper floors. And so when you look at it in context, you're obviously looking from the north to the south to the Kendall Square, Cambridge Crossing here, and you can see the arcade of the mall, and you can see what now we've created is basically 4 new buildings. The Sears building with 2 floors added to it, shown here at 85 feet, which is the original PUD 4. The middle building, which is at 135 feet with commercial at the base, residential above. The Best Buy building at 165 feet on the corner. And then as we get farthest away from the water on the Macy's site, we're at 185 feet. You can see the arcade as it exists today, and you can see the curve of retail that engages the canal as it exists today. And to give you some context about what those heights mean in terms of other buildings that are around us, you can see Riverview, you can see some of the existing buildings on Binney Street, as well as all of the buildings that have been built along the edge of the river on Land Boulevard, and in context, how we fit into that context as proposed with the kind of ascending height from Sears to the former parking garage, former Best Buy, and former Macy's building, really transforming all of the perimeter of that entire block and really breaking it down to the scale of an urban block that has a series of buildings on it and spaces between those buildings, has a diversity of architecture, a diversity of uses. With that, Steve will conclude. Oh, I do. I will very quickly.
You spend so much time
with me
working in building.
so that we can. Just want to make sure everybody can see where we are. There's the arcade.
Can you make sure you're talking to the
There you
microphone,
go.
please?
Thank you, Counselor. There's the arcade and the Canal Park, the Sears building, the middle block, and then on the corner of Cambridge Side Place and First, and then on the Macy's site. And you can see our strategy in terms of creating these the street wall at 65 feet and setbacks, additional setbacks up the building, and then as we get farthest away, and where we're on Land Boulevard is where we have the greatest height. Thank you.
Okay, any clarifying questions? Not comments, not suggestions, but questions for the presenters. Councilor Zondervan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, you didn't talk much about the Macy's building. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the plans are there?
So the Macy's building would again be demolished, either down to the floor, to grade, or maybe one structure one level above, so that we maintain what's below grade there. And that's a new building with, it will have loading docks on that side of the building, but new entrance into the commercial space above. The second floor will have the opportunity to be retail if there's a connection we can make into the second floor of the existing retail, and then commercial floor plates above, and it could be science and technology, could be office space, and it's a total of 185 feet tall.
Thank you.
One of the difficulties in that building, and we're studying it, the details of it, is that there's parking underneath it. There are ramps going down through to get into the garage. There's also a ramp to get down into the hotel on the back side of it. And so the details of it are pretty complicated in the way that the building lays out. So the foundation problems of kind of building through all that, keeping the mall in business while you're doing it and everything, is not only time consuming but very expensive. And so we're working on the detail of doing that. So the next presentation, the meeting we have with you, we can get into more detail on that building. But it's a good question. Thank you.
Thanks. One more question about, if you could go back to the slide where you showed the three buildings layouts. A little further back. Yeah, this one here. So am I correct? The middle building there, those are truck loading docks? Is that what's going on?
Yes. That's approximately the configuration of loading today. So think of the building basically here. This is open space, open to the sky, and open to the sky. And then this will be a pass through the ground floor of the building. This will load not only this building, the new building, it will load the Sears building, it will load this side of the mall, and then on this side are loading docks that will load the new building on the Best Buy site.
Thanks. I guess it's not really a question, but a little bit of a concern there with the cycle track and trucks going in and out that caught my eye. Thank you.
It will be the only curb cut on that whole 700-foot length of block.
And then what's happening with Best Buy? Are they going away or you're moving them?
Well, the current plan is to try to keep them, but in a different location when we do the new building. And then eventually could come back into the same building, but if we can satisfy the position, and we don't want to move them twice if we don't have to. But then they actually are doing a little better than they were a couple of years ago. And the competition obviously is a major problem for them that they're dealing with. And they had been looking to go to Somerville, and we're trying to keep them here. Yeah.
Please do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can we go to the building heights of the area? You called out a few, that's it. Now, the heights you're showing, at least in the buildings in East Cambridge, I believe, well, I know, include the mechanical. The tallest building in East Cambridge is 120 feet. The existing Sonesta is a few feet over that. River Court. So my question is related to this. In your buildings, the word has been that they probably will be labs, although I noticed one of the mechanicals didn't seem to indicate that. What are you assuming on mechanical heights?
And I think to clarify on the heights, when you see the range, like at 50 Binney of 140 to 165, I believe the 140 is to the roof, the 165 is the enclosed penthouse. I think the 140 is the limit of height along the south side of Binney.
Just clarification, it's approximately 120 feet is the base height. That's all the zoning allowed. The biggest variance from that was 2 feet.
So a question at this point. We can get to the points
I'll
later.
get back to questions. I'm clarifying a point made by the presenter.
So, Council, to answer your question, our drawings are showing penthouses that, for instance, on the building on the garage site, we assume that's office and residential. That penthouse is 20 feet tall. On the other buildings, we are showing penthouses, and if they're office, they will be 20 feet. If they are life science buildings, they'll be closer to 35 feet. We are showing the taller heights, but if they turn out to be office buildings, these will almost certainly be built-to-suit buildings, so the penthouses will be designed to accommodate the tenant.
Mm-hmm. Could you tell us about the ownership of the site? I recall Sonesta had some rights, and I believe Sears has some rights. Could you explain that, how that is coordinated?
You want to do it? Not sure.
Sears, we've never owned Sears. Sears building was owned by Sears. Sears sold that building to a company called Northwood. Northwood currently owns that space. We entered into an agreement with Northwood about 7 months ago so that it would become part of this development, because the uniqueness is that this, even though the ownership was always in Sears, excuse me, we always developed it and permitted as one project. So we went to Northwood and said this should all be continued to be looked at as a project. So that from the community standpoint, people don't differentiate. I've just walked into the Sears building. So our agreement with them is, even from a retailing standpoint, it's going to be retailed, because all of the first floor, regardless of building and regardless of whether it's office above it, will all be retail. So we entered an agreement with them 7 months ago.
So do they own a percentage? How is that ownership done? Square footage?
No, they continue to own the fee as they have. They don't own underneath their building. They own the fee, but we control it because it's part of the parking garage. We have a cooperation agreement with them to how we're going to develop it in the future. And then, as in all these buildings, whether it was originally the Filene's or the Sears, there's an REA, which is a reciprocal easement agreement, which governs how everything functions, who pays for what, and that's a private agreement, although a notice of it is recorded. We've always had it on this site, and we've entered into one with Northwood. So seamlessly, from the public standpoint and the operations standpoint, it will all function as one facility.
Yes, I know, but they have rights that will be increased as part of this new zoning.
Oh, absolutely. Their
And
request
does
is...
Sonesta?
No. No, Sonesta has
Sonesta's
rights
not
to
in it
certain...
anymore.
No, not as the building itself, only with respect to certain parking rights.
Let me clarify it, and probably in the first slide, I could have clarified a little bit when talking about when I put all the land together. Those of you that may remember, actually, there was a parking lot that Sonesta parked on.
Yes.
And I ended up buying the parking lot from them, and we have spaces within the garage so that Sonesta can use those spaces when they're having some kind of an event. It usually doesn't conflict with anything that we're doing because it's usually evening events when the mall isn't as busy. Yeah.
Great, thank you for clarifying that. To Mr. Manfredi, why isn't the Sears block moved back like the Lechmere and the Center block?
Because the parking garage site and the Lechmere site are, both of those buildings are basically being demolished to grade. The Sears building is not. The Sears building, as proposed, is 5 stories. That's an addition of 2 stories on the existing building. So the existing footprint remains.
But theoretically, it could be pushed back. This is a design intent. If I understand the ownership as it is, I mean, you presented First Street as being this great sidewalk, and yet it's only 2/3 of the frontage. You don't have to answer it now. It's just, are we doing it or aren't we doing it is why I'm asking this. And I think perhaps the most important question is, what is the rationale for the square footage increase that's being proposed? I understand, let me explain, I'm sorry, maybe I should clarify that. I understand mixed use, we're all for that. I understand First Street improvements, as you know, Mr. Karp, and we wanted that way back when we couldn't get it. So this is great news that you're considering that, but you're asking for, as I understand it, 625,000 square feet on top of the existing building, approximately size of the existing building. So what is the rationale for that? I mean, other people come in and say, we want this, we want that. Now, this is a unique building. I'm not questioning that. It's in a unique place. But I don't understand why that number is that number.
Well, I'll try to explain it. There are economic considerations to redeveloping this parcel. Keeping 2 levels of mall in place is actually an economic hardship, because of not only the construction cost and during construction, but also in the addition of that second level and keeping it active, and a lot of leases that were in the way, and we had to renegotiate those leases at not an advantageous economic situation in order to be able to redevelop the rest of the project. And you can't build all this at once. So we have to carry a lot of costs while we're developing one building at a time and trying to do a coordination of all the different parcels so it'll come out so it looks like that. And you can't underestimate and I mentioned this maybe before, how complicated it is to try to build a building and keep parking below and below there, and structurally have the building carry itself without displacing the parking and things while you're keeping an operating retail business in place. And one of the things that you pointed out to me the first time we had a meeting was that that the canal was critical to everything that we do, and the park was something that was in the original plan. And when I built the street through, originally I wanted to build a 2-level mall that went from the park and covered part of the park and one of the department stores where the park is. And then the other department store at the other end, basically where the canal is, would be a terrific, like a dumbbell, like it's typical in the mall. So this is probably the only mall in America where you go from a canal as an anchor to a park as an anchor, which isn't very typical to activity. And if you really think about it, it's probably the only mall in America, and this has been documented in publications of the International Council of Shopping Centers of a successful mall of this type, where none of the department stores had access to the first floor.
Right, that was,
And that, that was something in the design planning that we worked hard with you to try to accomplish. Living with some of the original criteria and trying not to change as much as we could, and considering the difficulty in redeveloping something and keeping the core of it in business, it's a lot of additional cost and a little additional hardship, and we'd have to get into more detail of that at a future date.
well, I will ask for you to do that in some written document. I'm sure what you're saying is true, but that is the criteria that you're presenting, the rationale, and we don't have that before us. And I would have hoped the planning board would have asked for that as well. In the past, they have for other upzonings. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Mellon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, to the petitioners, I just wanted to quickly bring the conversation to parking, because that's been a big topic of conversation in this chamber, and I know in the community, especially in East Cambridge. So just going back to your slide about parking, there's currently 2,500 spaces with all of the parking. You're proposing to demolish 800 of those spaces, so there would be 1,700 spaces left. And I believe when we talked about this, you said that the usage during the week was about half. Throughout half the spaces were empty. But I noticed at the planning board, one of the things you guys said you would do is a parking study, just to really flesh out those numbers and those details. Can you tell me a little bit about the parking study, whether it's underway, when it will be completed? I think these are details that we really need.
Happy to. We did present a scope to the Transportation Department. Although it is not common in zoning petitions to do a full-blown sort of traffic, and in this case, parking study, we thought it was important because of the critical nature of questions like that and where we are in East Cambridge to do that. So we're working through the scope. To give you just a sort of general sense, one advantage of owning a facility for as long as this is we can actually tell you for the last 20 years, every day, every hour, how many people park and where they park, which is a little bit different. We are proposing parking criteria that is consistent with what the city has determined in the sense of office and other commercial space and residential and the like. We feel very comfortable based on the usage that the spaces that we're going to have left underground, which is all the spaces that are underground, will be sufficient for the program that we're presenting here, because retail is actually the largest generator of parking. Less certainly in the commercial, in the office and the residential. So that is part of the parking study that we're presenting. And so we're working through that now. It isn't ready yet, but we've been probably studying the parking for several months of going through that. So we'll be able to present that and present the numbers. And one thing I think came from the CDD report, that our ratios and what we're planning are very consistent with what the city has been finding. And to be very honest, if you look at 20 years worth of data, you're going to see a straight line going down on demand on parking. Even on our busiest times, we have 1,000 empty parking spaces. I mean, it's just sort of the nature of how the world has changed. And again, part of that in working and having discussions with the Transportation Department, how can you continue to improve transit access, pedestrian and bicycle access, and that'll all be part of the report.
Councilor Mellon, three things. One is that we want to have the traffic study done before the council has to vote on the zoning. So that's a real target of what we're doing with the traffic department. The other thing is that the traffic formula that the city uses and is comfortable with draws an absolute cap on what we would ask for. In other words, we want to be sure that we're not asking for anything more than the remaining parking will support. and we feel comfortable that that's the case. And then the last thing is, because it's been a question we receive a lot, even with the reduced parking, we'll be able to offer free parking to East Cambridge during snow emergencies, just because the mall traffic will be down during snow emergencies as well.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm glad we're going to have that information before we vote. I just know that it's a hot topic of conversation, and I want to make sure that we're being thoughtful, and I'm glad that you're doing the study as part of the zoning. I have a lot more comments and questions, but I'll save them for after.
Councillor Siddiqui?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, you've mentioned that the constructions, there will be phases. How long do you anticipate this project to go on?
I wish I could be clear in answering that, but you know, I don't know what the economy is going to be in the future, and what the demand and how the demand could change. Obviously, there's enough demand today that if we could start construction tomorrow morning, we could probably build everything in a very short period of time, and we're hoping that it'll be one building at a time. It's very difficult to build 2 or 3 buildings at the same time because of the complexity of what we're doing. It's possible we could build something on the First Street side and be building something on the other side too, on the Macy side at the same time, if it works out that way. But it's demand given and time frames, and so it could extend a little bit of time. And it's not in our best interest. We'd like to do it as fast as we could.
The reason I ask, I think about some of the existing retail on First Street, Hemlands, the other restaurants,
Yeah.
and some of the, whatever the impacts may be on existing businesses. But that's a comment. That was my question. I'll follow up later with more.
Thank you very much.
It's a consideration. It always is when there's construction. The interesting thing when you're constructing a mall and you keep part of it in business, usually business stays. It's kind of people are so interested in what's going on, and it's a idiosyncrasy that's never been explained really. So, yeah.
Vice Mayor Deborah?
Thank you. Through you. Well, I think the slide that said it's complicated summed it up, because it is really complicated. I wanted to ask a little bit about the open space, how that works. I know one of the goals is to improve connections, and can you run through how that actually is helping East Cambridge connect better to the riverfront? And this is my understanding is that this is not, you're not creating new open space per se. You are offering to better connect open spaces and also to better program existing open spaces.
Actually, I think it's all 3 of those. You're right. We are proposing to create a connection through what is today the Sears building at grade, so from First Street through the building, that will come out into the food court, but you can see it comes out directly onto Canal Park. So where this red arrow is, that's the Sears footprint. This will be an arcade that basically has all of the same accessibility as the mall itself. Part 2 is exactly what you said, the opportunity to improve programming, enhance programming in the existing open spaces, but we're also creating 10 feet of wider sidewalk along 2/3 of that length, and we are proposing these small pocket parks that separate the building footprints.
I think we're also looking at, and we're not ready to make a presentation on this. When you go on either side of the canal, you can go underneath Edwin Lamb Boulevard, and how we make a direct connection into the river. So that's a plan we're working on that we'll bring back to you at some future date. We hope to get that done as soon as possible. The other thing that originally, and I mentioned this, but just for clarification, that the so-called street that connects the canal, goes from the canal to the park, and then across to the river where there's another park, and that was part of the original master plan, and that was one of the criteria for which we originally planned the mall, and that's one of the reasons why the department stores aren't connecting to it. So that's in some ways open space, and it was designed as a street going through the property.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for the petitioners? Councilor Zondervan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you tell us how much net retail you're adding or subtracting from the current configuration of the mall, including the third floor, which I guess you're subtracting already?
Do you have that number, David? Because it's not an exact science. It's not a one-to-one. We're not the amount we're taking off the third floor. There isn't exactly the same amount on the first floor because of some of the loading considerations and the depth of some of the stores, and some of the stores would be too deep. And do you know a figure, John?
It's a rough number, and again, it depends whether, for example, some of the second floor space in the Leachmere building might become retail, because all of this, and this is part of the Chapter 91 license that was originally part of this, which relates to the river and the canal, has to have public activation on the first level. If rough numbers, depending on sort of where we decide, there's probably a loss of a little bit over 300,000 square feet of retail coming out of the project. On a net basis. But again, as Steve says, that's a number that really could fluctuate depending on final design and uses.
You don't mean coming out of, you mean there'll be, just to clarify, there'll be about 300,000 feet of retail that will retained on the project. And David, if you go back to the slide of the so-called Best Buy Leachmere building, and just sort of clarification. If we can just take this one, basically this one. Right?
Oh,
yeah,
that's forward.
Yeah, that's forward.
Sorry.
Yeah, if we can get to the next pic, that one. Okay. So in David trying to explain earlier, I think, is that this building's designed. There are some tenants that are interested in having 2 floors. And so he's designed the building with glass, he pressed it again, glass on the second floor, so the second floor can be retail, so that we could actually have a store on that corner to connect on the 2 levels. So that would double the size of the retail. But I'd call that first street retail, but not first floor retail.
I'm just trying to keep the numbers straight. So you said, I think I heard you say that when the project's all done, you'd have about 300,000 square foot of retail?
That's a rough number. We are including that second floor just for clarification.
Right. And how much retail is there now?
Well, there was about 300,000 with the third level. There's about 100,000 on a level.
Okay.
So in rough numbers, yeah.
And that includes the anchor stores?
No, that's the mall stores. There was more space with the anchor stores. The anchor stores were replacing and with less retail. Yeah. No, that's a good point. That's a good clarification. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions of the petitioner? Okay, let's hear from city staff. I guess that's probably you, Mr. Roberts. You can just, no one else needs to move. You can stay there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Jeff Roberts, Director of Zoning and Development. I'll try to be very brief. The staff did put together a memo on this petition. The attempt was to summarize some of the main points, the sort of technical points of the petition and what the effects of those would be. The petitioner spoke to that a little bit. We also provided a summary, maybe a too brief summary of a very long planning history in this area, which some members of the committee are more intimately familiar with than I am. The planning board held a public hearing on this on March 19th. It was a good discussion. The planning board opted to continue the hearing to a future date not yet determined. Without making a recommendation, they had some things that they wanted to discuss further with the petitioner. And they laid out a number of different questions, some having to do with a variety of topics, including some of the questions that have come up already in this group, some further explanation as to the request how the particular requests for additional height and development development square footage were arrived at, more information about transportation and particularly the way the parking would work, and how the existing compares to what would be needed for the proposed plan. A little more discussion of what the expectations were for laboratory and potential light industry uses and how those would be treated in relation to what's currently there in the area. More about the residential use allocation and, again, how that was arrived at. And a little bit, maybe some discussion of, there was some discussion about phasing and how the residential is phased in with the rest of the project, which is often a consideration for PUD projects. And also along with that, the affordable housing component was a topic of discussion. There was some discussion about how the provision of retail would potentially create opportunities for local businesses or opportunities for a more affordable retail space. There was discussion of how climate resilience would be a factor in this proposed development, particularly given that there's an existing large below-grade garage and how that would need to be dealt with. And in terms of the petition itself, there was some discussion about understanding better how this, the structure of this proposal as a PUD overlay on top of a PUD overlay, where I think this is maybe the first time we've had a PUD zoning and then a PUD development and then a new PUD zoning with additional PUD development overlaid on top of that, and trying to keep clear which, what parts of the development fall under which parts of the zoning is something they wanted to help try to understand a little bit better. There were some specific pieces in the language that the planning board asked for some additional clarification on, and it's something that staff will look into. And there was some discussion about, again, along the lines of what was asked about tonight, open space and community benefits, and some additional information about what kinds of improvements might be considered, and they asked about some of the specific things that came up in the discussion and some of the items that were raised during public comment. So that's a very brief summary of the discussion, but again, the planning board didn't arrive at a recommendation. They'll look forward to an opportunity to meet with the petitioner again and discuss some of these outstanding questions.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Roberts? Councilor Carlin?
Thank you. On the existing height limits at Cambridge site, it's a question I raised at the planning board. The existing height is shown as 105 feet, and it's really 55 to 60 feet high. So I would ask you please to check that and change it. I asked the petitioner tonight what is the height, and it was confirmed at 55 to 65. I know you have a note here that it's the highest point, but the highest point doesn't count in zoning. It's the arcade, the rotunda that isn't occupied, and that has an impact on the proposed heights. So please do that. Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Roberts? No, okay, thank you very much. We will now go to public comment. We have roughly 10,000 people signed up for public comment. So,
Mr. Chair,
oh,
just
Councilor Toomey.
clarification. You had asked if we had any clarifying questions. Is it
Yes.
appropriate for the council to make some comments now?
I
I
would.
didn't have anything to clarify, so I was just curious what.
I was going
we
to
can
go to public
I
comment,
can wait, that's fine,
which is
so.
probably going to take a while, and that will inform our subsequent debate. So I have 3 sheets, and I was kidding about the 10,000 people, but not by much. So you have 3 minutes to speak. Please come up. I will read who's going to speak, and then the next 2 people in order. Make sure the microphone is on, and introduce yourself. Don't feel you need to speak. If you had a burning thought and someone else has already expressed it and you don't feel you need to, by no means feel you have to. And if you have written comments, please leave them in the box to the left. And if you want to email those comments to the clerk, you may at dlopez@cambridgema.gov. You will have 3 minutes, and in respect for everyone that's here, we're going to hold you tightly to that 3 minutes. So when I say your time is up, I'm going to say it with all the love I can muster, but your time will be up. Thank you. So first up is a maybe William, yes, followed by, that may be asking too much. The next one after him is Leroy Wood, and then followed by Steve Bennett.
Thank you. I'm William Dorr. I'm a 30-year resident at 4 Canal Park. I'm one of the first residents to have moved into that condominium complex. The Cambridge Side Mall has been a great neighbor. I want to begin that with that comment. Revitalization of the mall in the context of your development plan is a great and clever idea for sustaining the mall and the area. In listening to your presentation, I have 3 general areas for needs based on some of the issues. First, the issue is height. PUD 4 was 85 feet or to that order. These structures go from 85 feet now to 185 feet. You have a need for a shadow study because that street there is a north-south street. You have residents in 3-story structures to the left on the north side of that street, on the west side of that street, and residents on the south side, which is the complex that I live in, as well as on the east side, you have other residential units like the Esplanade and River Court. You need to, that's correct. You need to have a shadow study and you need to have an obstructed view study. These structures will project upwards and residents in the general area in all directions could potentially be impacted by it. You're eliminating one kind of wall and replacing it potentially with another kind of wall. Second subject is a need for a traffic study. That street, you do not show the bicycle path, which is found on the right-hand side, going to the north. You need to have a comprehensive traffic study for Land Boulevard and O'Brien Highway intersection, as well as for the First Street and Cambridge Street intersections. Bicycle paths are very serpentine through this area. They sort of creep around 0 Canal Park, found way down at the end, and since I commute that route every day, it's quite congested. The last is a pedestrian study. The traffic at those 2 intersections that I've referred to, Land and O'Brien, as well as First and Cambridge Street, are very complex to try to navigate now, and with the increase in traffic, both from cars and bicycles, and the relocation of the Lechmere Station, you need to have a comprehensive pedestrian study. I think for those of us, many elderly residents live in that neighborhood, both on the west side to the left, as you look there, as well on the north side.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I tried to flag you at 30, but you didn't see me.
Thank you.
So I didn't say it earlier, if we could not clap or whistle or hoot or whatever, that tends to be a chilling thing for people to do. I am not taking hands, thank you very much. Next up is Leroy Wood, followed by Stephen Bennett, followed by Arnold Williams.
Good evening. It's Leroy Ward. And I'm not going to be long. I'm just in favor of the project. To bring more housing to Cambridge is a positive thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is Stephen Bennett, followed by Arnold Williams, followed by Rafael Cabral.
Hi, I'm Steve Bennett. I've been a resident of Cambridge for 45 years as a student, as a businessman, and more recently as a practicing artist. I want to speak for a couple minutes on the plan to incorporate arts into the project and to reach out to local artists. So I've had the good fortune to be working with Cambridge Side for the last year. This was facilitated by the city's wonderful arts program. Cambridge is great for a lot of reasons, but if you're a practicing artist, it's especially great. The mall had installed a video column. Imagine a column that's 10 feet wide and 30 feet tall, and there's a wraparound video screen. They want to develop art that would, multimedia art that would engage people and make the mall a more pleasant experience and a fun place to go. So what I thought was going to be a simple project of, we'll have some colorful, interesting videos turned out to be a partnership where I've worked with them to develop specific content. We've tested the content, and indeed, people are enjoying it. I've seen families come by there and their kids come by and they look at what's going on the wall. I've seen people taking selfies there. One person even asked the mall marketing people, when's the next video going up? So we're getting some engagement there. What's been most interesting for me is the security guards love these things. And sidebar here, I was speaking with a fellow named Paul, and we were talking about his ideas for another video, and he stopped me and he said, wait a minute. He walked over to the wall. Someone had dropped a piece of trash. He picked it up and tossed it into the bin, came back and said, now we can talk. So I believe that the interest in working with local artists is strong, and if my experience with this partnership is anything, I think local artists in the community are going to find an expanded Cambridge Side presence to be a very good thing for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is Arnold Williams, followed by Rafael Cabral, followed by Jeff Martin.
Good evening, members of Cambridge and everybody who's in here. I'm fourth generation Cambridgian. I've been affiliated with Local 151 for 38 years, and I've had my hands on just about all kinds of construction. And from what I see here, it's a difficult task, but definitely achievable. And once we get everything together, put all our heads together, and you get the okay on this, I think it will be very productive to the neighborhood as far as bicycle friendly, pedestrian friendly, and all kinds of sorts of things like that, and especially more homes and housing, and we can appreciate that river. You know, that's all I have to say, and I hope everything goes forward. And from what I understand and what I've been hearing, that there's you guys are thinking about just about everything. And like I said, I had 38 years in this business, and like I said, it's a difficult task, but very achievable. Thank you for my time.
Thank you very much. Next up is Rafael Cabral, followed by Jeff Martin, followed possibly by Ariana Staples.
Good evening. My name is Rafael Cabral. I'm 33 years old, and I'm a first-year apprentice at the Boston Local 7. Throughout my apprenticeship, I'm not only learning the trade, but my family came to this country 35 years ago from the Dominican Republic, and I explained to my grandfather about my participation in my union and what's going to be happening in the area he lives at, especially the Galleria Mall. And 3 words came out of his mouth: it's about time. I think this is a winning situation for everyone who participated. The developer did a phenomenal job in not only the planning, and look at that, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. I see that the community is going to benefit greatly from this project, and a lot of hardworking union families are too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is Jeff Martin, followed possibly by Ariana Staples, followed by Marlene Lundberg.
Good evening. Thank you, Chairman, councilors, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jeff Martin. I'm business representative, president of Carpenters Local 328, 10 Holworthy Street. I've been in construction working in Cambridge since 1982, and I had the pleasure of building the Galleria Mall back in 1990. And we've been working there for the last almost 30 years. Fast forward almost 30 years, due to Amazon and online shopping, we need to support this project to keep its vitality and vibrance in Cambridge. The facelift on First Street would be great to enhance retail and restaurants. We are in full support of this project to balance out the Newark and all of East Cambridge. Make them all survive with more housing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does Ariana Staples want to speak? Is she here? No. Okay, next up is Marlene Lundberg, followed by Chris Correa, followed by Georgia Balafas.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I guess so. I can hear myself. Good evening, everybody. I'm a resident at Thomas Graves Landing, which consists of 4 Canal Park and 6 Canal Park. And there are at least 5 of us here. I'm not speaking for them. I'm just alerting you to the fact that there are a few of us here. I gave everybody a handout with the members of the committee should have the handout with the blue photo on it. Yes. I have a few extra copies of that. If anyone in the audience would like to have one, just raise your hand. I don't have enough for everyone, but okay, no takers? Okay. I want to start by discussing the handout. I created a visual trying to show the impact of the proposed development on our skyline. We live on the north side of the canal and look south. The Canal Park area is a very beautiful area. It started, I mean, it's like a park to us, and the height of the proposed buildings will take away some of our skyline. If you look at the handout, on the far right is a building that many in Cambridge consider to be an eyesore. It's the old Sullivan Court and Jail. I'm using it to give you an idea of height in the area, and if you take the 17th story of that eyesore building that I call it and draw a line across the page, you get an idea of what 17 stories would be in the proposed additions, except that they will be a little closer than that building, and so they will appear even larger. I've tried to draw as best I could what I think the additional buildings will do to our skyline, and that is from where I live on the 6th floor. People at ground level it will block even more of their skyline because they won't be as high. Note also I drew a line between the Macy's replacement and the Best Buy replacement because that whole end.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry, but your time is up. Next up is Chris Correa, followed by Georgia Balafis, followed by David Borsch.
Good evening. Christopher Correa, Cambridge born and raised, 35-year resident, currently living on Plymouth Street. I'm here representing Carpenters Local 328 in support of the petition. Cambridge side has been a great neighbor to the community, as well as a stomping ground for myself as a youth and my kid today. The third floor of the mall I don't see would be a total loss, seeing as that place has been a ghost town for the past few years and nothing seems to stay. Bringing things down to First Street, I think, would be ideal. It looks beautiful from the proposal. And going mixed route, in my opinion, bringing office space and residential wouldn't hurt. We could definitely use more affordable housing in the area. If the building doesn't adapt to the times, I feel like we're going to have another Meadow Glen Mall or old Assembly Square Mall sitting in our backyard. And, it needs some work. So I am for it, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Next up is Georgia Balafis, followed by David Boris, followed by Tom Joyce.
Hello. I grew up in Cambridge. I went to Morris Elementary School. I currently live in Cambridge in Central Square, and change is inevitable. My first job out of college was at the Athenaeum building. Right there, the Galleria Mall was the only thing we had for lunch. So from 1998 to 2000, I saw what was there, and I see what is now. Our city has changed a lot, and it's revitalized, and this building is just going to improve the city and everybody around us, and it's just going to be a big improvement. I'm in complete support of this project.
Thank you very much, David Boris, and Tom Joyce, and David Notter.
Thank you very much, Councilor Kelly, councilors of the committee. David Boris, a resident of 126 Harvey Street. Been in Cambridge with my family now 25 years. I'm here tonight also as a representative of Pile Drivers Local 56, we're part of the New England Regional Council of Carpenters. I'm here to speak in favor of the proposal. I like that it will widen First Street. It'll create a much more welcoming sidewalk view. I like that it also increases the space between the buildings. It's a neat design, and I think it's time for that. I also appreciate that the demographics and buying patterns are changing, and this developer is working with the times and the realities of our changes in our society. Yet at the same time, he's responding. The New England Development is responding to need for housing. We're going to create some housing. There's a lot of retail jobs that have been lost. The inclusion of light manufacturing and lab space will create jobs. So this is, on that score, it's a win-win-win. We get housing, we get jobs, we get a more welcoming design that's more appropriate for the Cambridge today. But I also want to, when I went to the planning board hearing a couple weeks ago, I was very impressed by the sheer number of nonprofit organizations that stood up and spoke in favor because of the contributions of New England Development to the city, to programs that serve, in many cases, an underserved population, the folks with the least means and least opportunity. And it wasn't something they did one-off. It was continuous support over years. This is a developer that has been giving back, is a role model for a good corporate citizen. And so while I understand there are issues with the design, this developer has given a lot to the city. I think we can give some changes that would help this project go forward. Finally, I want to speak as a parent of two students who've graduated. We're fortunate enough to go through Cambridge Public Schools K through 12. And the realities of Cambridge are that you see socioeconomic gaps, and that's the term you might hear in a journal. Let's talk about what it really means. It means you see the fact that Cambridge is a very expensive place to live. There are not a lot of opportunities for many families, and you see this at birthday parties, at the fact that 50% of our students are at school have subsidized school lunches. So we have to recognize that this is something our students see every day.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boris. Next up is Tom Joyce, followed by David Notter, followed by Heather Hoffman.
Hi, my name is Tom Joyce. I live at 273rd Street. I've lived in Cambridge, East Cambridge, for 25 years. I've worked here for 35 years in East Cambridge, so I've watched them all go from an empty parking lot, build up to one of the most successful malls in the area, and now it's starting to falter. It needs to be kept vital. I see Assembly Square and the Station Landing as sort of the model for what this needs to become. So there's a lot about this design that I like. There's also a lot that I question. For instance, the Sears building has labs in it, or potentially labs, which is questionable because I have friends that live in One First. It seems awfully close. Mr. Manfredi designed a beautiful building for Sears. If I had my way, I'd ask him to build it exactly as he designed it there. However, the rooftop mechanicals, I can't help thinking that it looks like somebody put a railroad freight car on the top of that building. It also, as one of the planning board members mentioned last week, the people in their residential building will be looking down on the rooftop mechanicals of the Sears building, which seems really problematic to me. And we see towers at the corner of Cambridge Side Place and First Street, and a much higher one at Cambridge Side and Land Boulevard. And my question is why that 185 zoning couldn't be, say, 165, 175, and spread the massing out for the full length of Cambridge Side Place. That would lower the height overall while still giving the square footage. So I see a lot that I like about this. I think there's a lot of work to be done on the zoning level, design level, and I think at the end we can come up with something that works for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is David Nutter, followed by Heather Hoffman, followed by Mike Doucette.
Good evening. My name is David Nutter, and I represent Urban Spaces, an abutter of the Cambridge side on First Street. We want to express our strong support for Mr. Karp's petition. The success of the First Street corridor depends highly on the success of Cambridge side. The proposed setbacks will have a very positive impact and open up the street and increase the quality of the street level experience. The proposed direct connection from the main level of the retail to First Street will help extend that first floor retail to First Street. The Cambridge side team have been great neighbors to us, and anytime we've had any issues, Rich McKinnon and Izzy Shade have been very responsive. We strongly support the Cambridge side plans.
Thank you very much. Next up is Heather Hoffman, followed by Mike Doucette, followed by Frank Moran from 66 Winter Street.
Hi, my name is Heather Hoffman. I live at 213 Hurley Street. I moved there when this was still parking lots, and I got to be awakened every morning for what seemed like forever by the pile drivers. I think this is prettier than Warehouse Liquors ever thought of being, however. I want to start with the nice things. Number one, I am really glad that you're paying attention to First Street. I am also glad that you are building, you are proposing better looking buildings, even though this is a zoning petition. We are not talking about design review. And to the construction workers, I will point out that there are millions of square feet of construction in the area, so they needn't worry about finding work. And I will also say that, in fact, the mall has been a good neighbor. And however, you know, even good neighbors can ask you things that you might want to say no to. I would like to point to that model that I also thank them for. It's a huge area, and it's really helpful. I want to really thank them for pointing out how inappropriate that big ugly thing in the middle is. And it should be gone. But what they're illustrating is how our neighborhood is being walled in. Our neighborhood is that small thing, the low-lying stuff that an awful lot of people manage to live in, even if it isn't giant towers. And I think that we really need to rethink how the tall buildings keep marching towards our neighborhood. just because there's a tall building here, you say, oh, well, we can put a tall building next to it, and then next to it, and then next to it, and the next thing you know, out my window is a 20-story building, which it actually is right now. But anyway, that's a thing that I question about this, because this is still a residential neighborhood primarily, and the noise that goes along with labs. Anyone who walks near Kendall Square knows that the city doesn't enforce the noise provisions that are in the zoning ordinance, much less the ones in the noise ordinance. And that's a really serious consideration. Just the mechanicals in general.
Thank you very much.
You will do everything you can to keep that
The
noise
next
away.
up is Mike Doucette, followed by Frank Morin, followed by Matt Connolly.
Good evening, councilors. Mike Doucette. I'm the president of Ironworkers Local 7. Hearing a lot of good things tonight. Affordable housing kind of sticks out with me. I know the residents need that. A lot of people are moving out of the city. We want people to stay in the city. With that, the First Street improvements, I think, are beyond needed. With North Point right around the corner, the Green Line extension, I think it's going to tie everything in nicely, keep business there. Sounds like there's a long-term job opportunities there. So we definitely, we're backing this project. And if it doesn't happen, then you're going to have vacancies. That's the last thing we want in that neighborhood is more vacancies. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is Frank Morin, followed by Matt Connolly, followed by Barbara Rubel.
Hi, how's everyone doing? I rent on Winter Street. I work for Local 7 Union Ironworkers. Going to the Cambridge Side Galleria Mall, like a beautiful day like today, spring's, starting, and to be able to hang out there throughout the years, and also when this project is done, to be able to go there when it's all new would be unbelievable. It's a good opportunity for like Mike said, jobs for obviously construction workers like myself, union members, and for furthering jobs in the community as well. And like the woman before me said a few speakers ago, having an opportunity to go to lunch at the mall or hanging out there just on a day like today, it's a great thing. The mall is a staple in the neighborhood, and I believe it needs to be renovated like we have here, and just being able to go there would be an awesome opportunity. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is Matt Connolly, followed by Barbara Rubel, followed by Sharon Zimmerman.
Good evening, Matthew Connolly. I live at 13 Cornelius Way in Cambridge. I want to agree with other people who have talked about the need for this project. I agree with that something needs to happen here. The retail market has changed quite a bit, and for the development for First Street is a good thing. What I am concerned about is the cost for that. Of the slides that I saw, the one that really struck out to me is that this proposal is a zoning and design framework to meet our goals and respond to our challenges. And I think that's true. There's very little in this petition that really talks about with any specificity what the community benefit is or what the developer is going to provide. This development is going to make a building that is over 200 feet high once you include mechanicals. It's going to include 600,000 plus square feet. And when it comes to the community development aspect, there's going to be open space that says something along the lines of the developer or its affiliates has historically contributed to or is committed to contributing to the creation of open space. I don't know what that means. And I don't think you know what that means either. And there are a series of proposals in here that make it very vague and unclear what you would be approving in exchange for very clear 200 feet of height, 600,000 feet of space, and a lot of development that is going to fundamentally change this neighborhood and will come at a great cost to the neighborhood. So I'm glad that this proposal is happening. I'm glad that this is going forward, but I think there needs to be some real work done before we can approve it and before you can approve it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is Barbara Rubel, followed by Sharon Zimmerman, followed by Anderson Lima.
Thank you. My name is Barbara Rubel, and I live at 21 Otis Street, so I think I'm one of the closest residential abutters right now. I love the mall, I use the mall, and I want the mall to thrive. I do, however, want to say that I think that our little neighborhood is not just a link between Kendall Square and Cambridge Crossing. It's a real neighborhood, and the mall is a part of it, but it needs to retain some of that neighborhood quality. I like the plans, the residential, the office space. There's just a little too much of it. I think the heights are excessive, and I hope you can find a way to bring them down and still achieve your goals. I have a very strong complaint against the possibility of labs in the Sears building. It's pretty close to where I live. And I know that labs operate 24/7. That equipment has to keep going to keep the hoods going and to keep everything that's being researched or worked on in the lab safe. And that will be noisy. It's very hard to make it not be noisy. And it's very close to where I live. So no labs there. I don't think you need to have labs all over the whole city of Cambridge. And if we can keep this area residential, commercial, retail, that would be great. So the height, the labs, and finally parking. And I think that I appreciate the mall taking the initiative to do the study and their honesty in saying that the parking that will remain will serve the project. And I worry about what that means for the larger neighborhood, given the proposal to turn 420 parking spaces in the municipal garage over to a private developer. So I think it's very important for the city to look at the traffic and parking issues in the whole neighborhood and not just project by project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next up is Sharon Zimmerman, followed by Anderson Lima, followed by Lee Ferris.
Hi, I'm Sharon Zimmerman, Executive Director of Cambridge Camping. We are a 125-year-old Cambridge agency, and we provide camp programs to 500 urban youth from under-resourced circumstances every year. We know the Cambridge community well. 3 years ago, Paul Ryder called me to tell me that Cambridge Camping was chosen as the Cambridge beneficiary for Cambridge Side's first half marathon event, and that I should expect a large donation. It was a tough year financially for our agency, and I thought God herself had come down and given us the gift we needed to get us through the year. Since the planning began for that very first marathon, I've worked closely with Peter DeVito and his staff on a number of community projects and events. With Izzy Shate's blessing and support of our partnership, our partnership has grown to benefit the families that we serve. And I have gotten to know how these folks do business and what their values are. What I've learned is that New England Development cares deeply about Cambridge. They know what it takes to make a community feel like a real community. They value diversity. They treat people right, and they care about their customers, partners, and those who participate in all the various events and resources they bring to Cambridge. And they don't just care about those with pockets deep enough to shop or register for a marathon or buy a ticket to an event. They care about those who have less, who struggle, and who don't have equal access to so many of the great things Cambridge has to offer. They walk the walk. They have given over $50,000 to Cambridge Camping to help send low-income kids to camp. Peter's team invited 30 of our campers and camper families to run and ride, and they provided them with breakfast, T-shirts, bikes, and offered transportation for our families so that they could attend. They fixed our broken-down, unrideable camp bikes at no charge. They gave us hundreds of marathon jackets and T-shirts, which we handed out to campers who often never get to wear new clothes. Peter served on our honorary committee for 125th event and helped raise money from some of his vendors, which I know compromised what he could ask from them for his events. Peter's team is working with us to host this year's annual event at Cambridge Side. They're providing space at no cost. They got us the riverboat at no cost. They're soliciting for in-kind donations for food and drinks, and they are assisting with marketing and advertising, all pro bono. I've sat around the conference table with Peter's team talking about many community events, and here's what comes through. generosity with sincerity, commitment to making Cambridge an even better community, an unrelenting desire to be successful, and respect and willingness to listen and collaborate. Any project that New England Development wants to bring to Cambridge should be wholeheartedly supported. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Next up is Anderson Lima, followed by Lee Ferris, followed by Rhonda Massey.
Good evening, guys. I'm 23 years old, born and raised in Cambridge. I live at 566 Winter Street. I am out of 151 Laborers Union out of Cambridge. I'm in full support of this project. Growing up in Cambridge, I've been to the Galleria Mall I don't know how many times. I do have a 2-year-old son that I do take over there. We both love it, going next to the water, working next door. Sometimes I'll go to the mall for lunch, so I'm in full support to see it get renovated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is Lee Ferris, followed by Rhonda Massey, followed by Peter Crowley.
Hi, Lee Ferris, 269 Norfolk Street in the Port or Area 4. I'm speaking tonight for the Cambridge Residents Alliance, which has over 1,000 supporters. I want to thank the developers for the presentation and the revisioning of First Street. I will note that the developers mentioned the ways that they feel that they are following the city plans, but they didn't explain the ways that they don't follow the plans that have been done for the area. So all of the plans, including ECAPS and K2 as the most recent ones, recommended shorter buildings near the residential East Cambridge neighborhood and better connections from the neighborhood to the river. And I don't think that this proposal substantially increases better connections to the river, and I think it does wall off the neighborhood further from the river with the taller buildings. I like the ground floor retail, and I think it will be an improvement to the streetscape, and I support reallocating some of the square footage currently that is retail to residential. However, I would rather see a higher proportion of residential square footage, 40% like at Volpe or in the MXD district, because we do need more housing in Cambridge, particularly that would give us more affordable housing. I think that the opposite side of First Street is 65 feet high, and I don't see any reason that the heights that the developer is asking for should be allowed. I didn't find the response to Councilor Carlone's question convincing. And I particularly think that lab use in the proximity of residential dwellings is not a good idea. And I would really like it if our city council would revise the zoning code to distinguish lab use from office use. They are really different, and that's something the council really needs to work on. I think that the mitigation that's proposed is really insufficient, and I'm looking forward to having it more spelled out. But right now, I see no reason to allow the developer to almost double the square footage of the project and to more than double the height. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is Rhonda Massey, followed by Peter Crowley, followed by Shervin Canela from Fort Canal Park.
Okay, Rhonda Massey, 211 Charles Street. I understand the dilemma, and I support re-envisioning and rebuilding the mall. I do not like the height. 185 feet, we're being boxed in, we're being walled in, and I'm quite frankly sick of it. I mean, housing is wonderful, it'll be good to change that. Retail is having a hard time, And I know, which is strange because I don't drive. I've got a license, it's a nifty piece of ID. But not enough attention is paid to parking. We're considering giving away 420 parking spaces. We're considering giving away, or not giving away, eliminating some of the parking here. Get out of the mall, get out of your cars, walk around. The reason that the parking spaces are not being used in the garage is all of the people who park on the side streets, either at the meters or where there is not marked residential parking, and they walk down to the mall. I live 5 blocks down on Charles Street from the mall, and I can tell you that this is true. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is Peter Crowley, followed by Shervia Carmela, followed by Elon Levy.
Hello, my name is Peter Crawley. I live at 88 Thorndike Street, about 4 blocks from the mall. I also want to echo the fact that it's wonderful to live near the mall. It's nice to be able to go to the food court when you don't feel like cooking, or take your kids to the ride and run events. And I think New England Development's been a good corporate citizen. But that said, I echo Councilor Carlone's basic question, which is, you know, as a resident, many of my neighbors and I do not understand the rationale for granting a large public entitlement valued in the neighborhood of $90 to $100 million for this level of square footage to a mature property that does not need a public subsidy. If the city wants to encourage development in a blighted area of the city by offering zoning bonuses, this makes sense. But East Cambridge is surely not starving for new development. The First Street area in East Cambridge has limited infrastructure capacity, including narrow streets, limited river crossings over to Boston for cars, pedestrians, and bikes. It has overburdened street parking, etc. As we finally revitalize First Street, are 4 towers really the best urban planning solution? First Street has the opportunity to become a comfortable pedestrian, retail, and mixed-use area with human-scale buildings like the ones that have been proposed and supported to date by the neighborhood and the city on the west side of First Street. These buildings, several of which are being developed by Paul Onyebane, have stayed well under the 85-foot zoning height limit. In fact, the new 85 First Street office and retail building directly across the street from the mall is only 2 stories high. So towers by New England Development and this does include the mechanicals because they do cast shadows and exist, of 200 feet, 170 feet, and 120 feet on First Street will create a real canyon effect. The other problem that I really hope that the developer addresses are the shadows. The Leechmere Boat Canal was a prize public benefit of the Riverfront Development Project 30 years ago. It's wonderful to spend time there, and the sun does hit it. But if the Sears Tower goes to 120 feet, including the mechanicals, and the mid-block building goes to 170 feet, there is going to be a lot of shadow on the
Thank you very much. The next up is Shervin Kamala, followed by Elon Levy, followed by Chuck Hines.
Hello, my name is Shervin Kamalian. I'm 37-year-old, and I live in Fort Canal Park for the last 9 years. I just would like to reiterate what whoever is talking about the issues of the height, we are the people who live in that neighborhood. And whoever talked about in favor or supporting this project is either construction worker, carpenter, or whoever have a piece of a stake in this project. I'm trying to talk in a simple word. And the fact is that the traffic is a big issue. We have really narrow streets, and which is really important to work on. And also the shadow study by making First Street a little bit nicer, you are destroying the Canal Park and everything that people gather during noontime or summertime or whenever even you have the marathon run, everybody comes because there's a nice sunlight and there's a nice view of the skylight even when you are standing next to the canal. And by going above 85 feet, basically, we already have lots of tall building in the North Point, which is different from East Cambridge. And 25 to 50% of those apartments are empty. And they are all for this. There is AVA building, there are multiple builders, and that they are offering, like, for example, you don't need to pay the first 2 months rent to get in. So I don't really see the need for adding more building and killing the Canal Park just to have a little bit nicer First Street. And First Street is really narrow, and it already had a big, wide connection to the Canal Park and the fast food. So setting up a tiny corridor to connect into the fast food, I don't know how it can help when you have that wide connection. And also, so shadowing traffic and the height is really excessive. And I think there was whoever came up with the idea of PUD for 85 feet limit, there was a reason for that. And I just see that I think that everything is about money, whoever supports this project. And it's not right to changing the whole neighborhood structure and whatever was envisioned for this area, specifically East Cambridge, to just make more money. And basically, the other thing is that based on the slides, there is no view of the canal. Everything is from the First Street point of view. We really need to see the effect on in the back of the mall at the Fort Canal when you have the jet fountain, and there are lots of boat tourism happening there, and all the marathon things are happening there. But when it's blocked by all these shadows, I don't think anyone is enjoying to be there. And this is one thing. The other thing that I want to mention that I'm blanking on is. Yeah, and also the laboratories. I feel it's a health hazard. Having shadow over the canal that the water is not really, there's no sufficient water current. It can be also some environmental issue that
Thank
needs
you very much.
environmental studies.
The next up is Elon Levy, followed by Chuck Hines.
Good evening, member of the Ordinance Committee, Mr. Carp, and New England Development. So I'll start with what you, Russell, said at the beginning of the last planning board. If there's a school of thought that if there's one tower, a way to just kind of make it fit in better is to build more towers. Well, fantastic. That's what we've been doing in Kendall Square. We'll be doing that also by the river, and then we'll bring it into the neighborhood. The Sullivan Courthouse will melt into all those big buildings, and our neighborhoods will have disappeared. That's a very nice program. So now I'll start with the real stuff. Eversource, right? 625,000 square feet, Eversource near the Kennedy Longfellow School. A Metropolitan Pipe, 500,000 square feet, Eversource is right there next Kennedy Longfellow School because we don't do any holistic planning. We have the Gore Street that was digged up. The reason we don't do planning, Eversource is on the side of the Kennedy Longfellow School. So let's start actually doing planning and making sure that you guys don't even look at me because you don't feel even offended by the fact that Eversource can come next to Kennedy Longfellow, which is the elementary school which houses most of our most vulnerable children, and nothing happens. It's like a total silence. 625,000 square feet, that's what we get for not planning. So let's do a holistic planning. Let's be reasonable. We are asking New England Development to do a parking study when we are doing a parking study at the same time. How is that redundancy reasonable? Why should we pay twice for the same thing? Is the New England study going to be more reasonable or less reasonable or confirm whatever the city puts forward? Which one do you believe? Do we reinforce each other so that there's collusion so that we can say that the courthouse could happen and you can actually give the parking to Leggett McCall? There's a real problem here. We're not planning, and we get Eversource next to the elementary school. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The last listed speaker is Chuck Hines. Is Chuck here?
Chuck couldn't make it tonight.
Okay. Is there anyone that hasn't spoken that would like to? Okay.
What I wanted to
Did
say
you
that I
speak
plan-
already? Okay.
Yes. Oh.
Thank you. Who is, okay.
Might as well since I'm standing. My name is Alan Green. I live at 82 Fifth Street in East Cambridge. Before I say what I want to say, I just wanted to read you the last paragraph of a letter that the East Cambridge planning team submitted to you all. So here's the last paragraph. Cambridge side NED has been an outstanding neighbor and an integral part of East Cambridge for 30 years. We understand the mall is facing challenges from the new retailing environment. However, we reject the PUD 8 zoning petition as written for the reasons mentioned herein, but look forward to working with the highly respected New England development team to develop a petition to meet the needs of NED and the East Cambridge neighborhood. So that you have on file. I just wanted to read that last paragraph. Now I'll speak for myself. I was at the presentation that Mr. Manfredi, he showed his design for the First Street project, and I actually thought it was a very nice plan, very nice to look at, really. I applaud you for that. The problem I have is something that I said to Mr. McKinnon in an email, is that it's just too damn high. Like everything else that's going up here, it just seems to be baked into a bigger picture of neglect for us, neglect for foresight and planning at the urban level. So that's a problem for me. Another problem for me has to do with the Leechmere Canal. I think that is one of the nicest places in East Cambridge. It's a very contemplative environment, and I like to be there. I like to walk in all seasons there. I think when this plan, if it goes through, with the building heights that are going to be there, we're going to have the shadows, but we're also going to have the wind factor. The wind displacement could be awful there, which is right now a very good environment. I personally, if there's a public benefit here, the only one I see right now is to have this sort of opening on First Street that will give direct access to the mall. What I'd like to see is that shopping area seems to be hidden away. I wrote to Mr. McKinnon several months ago. I said, if you wanted to fix things with the mall, what I would suggest is that you turn things inside out. You put the stores outside on First Street and outside in the back area, and you put the offices on the inside. I still think that would be good, and I think that's more what Assembly Square is like. Apart from that, I'm against lab spaces. So the idea of having a lab space as close to our neighborhood as that is a real problem, particularly in the Sears building right there on First. That's pretty much all I want to say. I think other people have spoken more articulately. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who hasn't spoken that would like to speak? Come on up and introduce yourself, and you have 3 minutes.
Chris Matthews, 26 6th Street. I'm a board member of the East Cambridge Planning Team. I love the Galleria. It's a great asset in our neighborhood. It needs to survive in the long run, and I think this is a good project. But when we look at 600,000 square feet of upzoning, that's worth plus or minus $100 million to these guys sitting here. So when I look at the public benefits that mitigate that $100 million gift, you could create it out of thin air, right, with upzoning. It doesn't exist today. It will exist if the upzoning goes ahead. I don't think the public benefits right now are commensurate with that gift. The other problem I have is First Street has never been considered as a street. There's some plans on one side, there's some plans on the other side, there's millions and millions of square feet going on up at Cambridge Crossing and at the other end down in Kendall Square. And not one of the planning studies done of East Cambridge in the last 20 or 30 years has looked at First Street. And it's about to be the main connector between Leechmere and Kendall, which are the preeminent life sciences research hub on the planet. And we're not even looking at the street in its entirety. So as much as I love what Steve and Rich and the gang and David are doing on their side of First Street, we're about to stumble into a huge disaster on the other side with the First Street garage and with the Sullivan Courthouse, and somebody that's not just neighborhood representatives doing it for free in their own time needs to look at this in an adult, joined-up way that includes urban design, economic development, and all of those things. It doesn't need to take long. But somebody needs to do it, please.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that has not spoken who would like to speak? Okay, seeing no one, I'll entertain a motion to close public comment. Councilor Toomey moves. All in favor? Great. Okay, back to us. Councilor Toomey, you want to start us off?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to thank all the public speakers and the presenter and the Community Development Department for the presentation here this evening. And this tonight is actually the first night that the council has officially heard this, and I think this is the first of many committee hearings on this and talking about this issue. So this is the beginning, and I think clearly, and I think, you know, just having in the common theme certainly is the heights and the open space and the mitigation. Clearly is very concerned in the lab space, if there's going to be lab space, where it will be located. I think that, you know, I can never figure out when they built the mall that there was just a wall from Oda Street down to Charles Street. There was no access at all to the river. It was just walled off completely. So I'm glad to see that we're going to have some access now in terms of that. You know, just some ideas in terms of, you know, like I said, I know there's going to be further negotiations on the heights and especially about the traffic impacts. And Mr. Doyle is absolutely correct about the pedestrian part of the study of that. That Land Boulevard and Monsignor Bryan Highway is an awful, you know, even for people to get past going to the Museum of Science and over to North Point. As part of the mitigation, you know, we've talked, members of the community before, about from the canal extending behind the Museum of Science, similar to we have the boardwalk that connects First Street to Third Street next to Viola now. Something like that would be tremendous in terms of that. The open space part of it is huge, and you know, I look at, you know, I walk that river a lot, and I mean, behind the Sonesta, it's just dead space. I mean, there's nothing there. All the trees are gone. So I mean, and I know it's not on your property, but you know, in terms of maybe some mitigation to look at. Sprucing that up, planting trees, you know, because the state obviously is not going to do it. We've been trying that for years. And beside that is the Gatehouse Park, which nobody ever uses. There's like 2 benches there. And is there a way that there can be more public access and some activities on that space? And I think, Mr. Guy, I didn't hear when you talked about, and you can't do the access from your property because when you cross the river, you have the Land Boulevard, you do have, you know, the Sonesta and all the way down, so there's no access for the public there either. They have to go around to the Sonesta or cut through the Gatehouse Park. Did I hear someone mention something about access? I don't know if I heard a tunnel going underneath or from First Street to get to the river. Did I not hear that correctly? I thought you would mention something about access from
there is,
Boulevard
if you
to the river.
along the canal, you can go underneath Land Boulevard to be able to get over to the Museum of Science, and I think that's what I was talking about. And you can do that on either side and get along the river. I think that was in the original planning.
Okay. But in terms of, you know, we all know the retail certainly has changed a lot, but the exciting part, you know, having, and, you know, Chris is right about the, you know, the study of First Street completely, but to now have First Street widened and having outdoor, you know, seating for restaurants and stuff, just bringing activity, because first, I mean, it's barren, that whole stretch there in front of the mall and like I said, never understood why that was designed that way back then, but it is what it is. So, but I think this certainly was the first night, and I think clearly, hopefully, the presenters in the city have heard a lot of the concerns of the public on this, and I'm looking forward to further discussions on how we can hopefully make this a better project for everybody. And so we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you to the folks who spoke. I think this was a refreshing ordinance committee meeting in terms of conversation. So often when we talk about projects and upzoning, it's the people who are saying yes at any cost and the people who are saying no at any cost. And I didn't really hear that today. I heard a lot of people who have a lot of respect for you, Mr. Karp, and for what you've done in the community, and who have raised, I think reasonable questions and reasonable concerns, but aren't sticking a stake in the ground and saying, absolutely not. And that type of open dialogue, I think, is going to get us to a very good place. So I think it's an exciting conversation. And I think we're going to, we'll come up with something that, it's not going to address everybody's concerns all the time, but I think we can do better, and we'll end up in a good place. So I do want to thank you also, Mr. Karp, for just your commitment to the community. I don't know if any of the four of you, on a side note, I go to the mall a lot. I don't know if any of the four of you had anything to do with the edible cookie dough store that opened up, but I thank you and I curse you because it's going to put me in the hospital. But you're, and the reason I say that is not to say that because you've been a long-time community member and a really good community member that you should get everything that you want, but it means something to me, and I think we heard it from folks in the community too. You're not coming in from out of state that has no connection to this city, has no commitment to this city, who doesn't know this city. We're seeing that happen a lot with projects that are happening in Cambridge, people who really aren't committed as much to the community as we would like them to be. And that gives me, again, a lot of hope that we're going to end up in a really good place, because I know that you do care about this city. And so I don't think that's unimportant. In terms of, I'll just reiterate some things that I would like, again, to be considered as we move forward. And as Councilor Toomey said, this has got a ways to go. Nobody's approving anything tonight. I do think the affordable housing component, or the housing component, I should say, I think we can do a lot better on that. And I think we need to do better on that. And I think that that helps your retail as well. People who work in a business who are there from 9 to 5 and may get lunch. We talked a lot about lunch, but if you're living there, you could be getting breakfast, lunch, dinner, going, buying a carton of milk or whatever. I mean, it's better for your businesses to have residents. I think the concern about labs is I share that concern as well. I understand, I think we have to understand the financial picture. People want less height, so if you bring the height down, then that impacts the finances of the project. If you take labs out where you can get the highest rent, that impacts the project. If you cut back on the density to create more green space, that cuts back on them. So at some point, some of these things, we may not be able to get all of these things, but I think the concern around labs is an important one. Another concern that we've heard a lot recently is the lack of affordable nonprofit space in our city. We know that 99 Bishop Allen Drive, that houses 20 some odd nonprofits, is being sold. It may or may not remain a space for nonprofits. And I think that's something that I'd like you to look at in terms of your commercial space. And is there a way to bring in some nonprofits that are in the community that are either losing their space now or need more affordable space? Nonprofits are very important to our city and very close partners in supporting our residents. So I'd like to just have you consider that. I hadn't heard that mentioned before. And then obviously, there's enlivening First Street and bringing retail down to the first floor, but a lot depends on what that retail is, right? If we get a lot of cell phone stores and other things that sure, we need those, I guess, around, but we got a lot of them. That's one thing. So thinking about, are there ways to create, we talk a lot about retail, about creating smaller storefronts that are a little less expensive for people to rent. Can we make sure that we're working with our economic development department to think about how we can support local businesses, minority-owned businesses, really not just make it a, not just, I know Assembly Square is, or Assembly Row, whatever, is, everyone's looking to that now because it's so successful, but honestly, I'm not crazy about a lot of the retail that's there, and I think we can make it a little better and give people something different than what they get in other places to attract them to Cambridge. And I think some of that involves smaller, locally owned businesses that are more eclectic and not so cookie cutter. So those are some of my initial thoughts, but I do thank you. I think this is exciting. I think it's overdue. And I think that, I know that with your commitment to the city, we're going to get to someplace very good and expand the edible cookie dough store. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up quickly on the mayor's suggestion of nonprofit affordable space, one idea would be to have shared space like WeWork and have a nonprofit rate that they would agree to. And that might be a good way to accomplish that goal. So some of my requests, and I'll preface those with saying that I too think this is a great project and clearly much needed. But we do need to take account of some of the concerns that are being raised. This will be no surprise to anyone, but I would like all your buildings to be net zero. It's possible now. We have the technology. It shouldn't be that hard. I too would like to see more housing, and I would like to see more of it be affordable. I think you could even consider making all of it affordable. I would like some more clarity on the pedestrian and bicycle improvements. I think there's a lot of promise there, but I agree with some of the speakers that it needs to be clarified, and I do have some concerns about the truck movements in and out of there. Having run a biotech company myself, I have to agree with my neighbors that this is not a good location for that kind of use. Maybe where the Macy's building is, but not on First Street, which is really close to the neighbors, and it does generate a lot of noise. I think I survive because I keep my windows closed, but it's definitely a nuisance for people in the neighborhood. Certainly the heights are a challenge for people, and I think that needs to be looked at. Personally, I'm not concerned about loss of parking. I think your analysis is accurate and will show that it will continue to decline as our modes of transportation change. I do have a question about the valuation. People are throwing out there $100 million for 600 square feet. Hope I'm 600,000 square feet. I hope I'm not doing my math wrong, but that comes to $180 a foot in net present value. That sounds low to me. Could you comment on that?
I'm confused about the numbers too. I'm not quite sure how they add up to where people came up to. But we'll have to do some analysis ourselves, come back to you and present something, and then you can evaluate how accurate it is. Yeah.
Thanks. That would be great. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Devra.
Thank you. Well, and I'll try to be brief because I think there's certainly an overarching theme here, which is that many of us feel that we're appreciative that New England Development has been such a great community partner, and all of us, I think, acknowledge that First Street needs a lot of help, even a holistic end-to-end plan. that the mall business has changed, and we, appreciate that it needs to be reformatted. I think where we're going to spend the next amount of time talking about is the bargain, and all of these upzonings that we're receiving seem to be essentially entering into bargains with various entities, some of whom already own the land, some of whom are bargaining to get the land. And, it's becoming difficult for us to know, and we discussed this with the Met Pipe petition, sort of like what the value is, what we're giving up and what we're getting in exchange. So I think the community benefits and the relative heights will certainly be an active negotiation. It does set a precedent, I think, that kind of all you need to do is ask, and then it becomes a bargaining thing. And at what point is zoning ever sort of zoning and not just notional? And if you ask for more, well, we'll go back and forth, and you'll get part of what you asked for, and we'll get some of what we asked for. And maybe that's the way things are. Maybe that's the way Boston does it. But it's starting to feel like a trend. Like other people, I look at this and I look at the whole amount of development on both PUDs, even though it's one site, and I say that less than 10% of the total square footage would be housing, as I understand it. I think it's more like 8%. And if we were looking at a new PUD today, there's no way we would say that amount of housing would be adequate. So I think the housing needs to go way up. Ditto for the open space. I mean, we're almost doubling the amount of density on a site, but we're saying that the existing open space is adequate, and even potentially compromising it with buildings that may create shadows or wind or other effects that make the existing open space somewhat less usable or desirable. So I think that needs to be really thought about. I'm also interested that we've spent all of our time talking about First Street when the largest building goes on Land Boulevard, and as Councilor Toomey and others have pointed out, Land Boulevard is an absolute nightmare from a pedestrian standpoint. Trying to cross even from the existing building over to the Sonesta is terrifying. And we're talking about creating bike connections and pedestrian connections, but we're putting people, we're sending them over to the McGrath Highway and Land Boulevard, which are not safe. We've had a pedestrian fatality, very close to this. We've had a lot of conversation about how to get people across the Craigie Bridge. The area is, creating one segment of a bike path is not going to really help. So, I mean, that's certainly good, but we've got a long way to go. I too have concerns about what the remaining retail will be in terms of how affordable it will be. I think what people in the neighborhood appreciate about Cambridge side is that it's a neighborhood serving mall. It's not Copley Square. It's not, whatever that fancy place in Chestnut Hill is. It's, pretty average stores where you can get things you need on a day-to-day basis. And I would hope it would stay that way and not become Copley Square or the new thing in Framingham. And I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Apparently, I'm supposed to go side to side, so I apologize to the left side of the room. Councilor Carlon?
Thank you. I accept your apology. In all fairness, a little history, the arcade counts as open space. The arcade that the New England development put forth, that became a condition that it be on access where it is. And since they didn't have 20% open space, that filled up the balance. Charles Park, the triangular park that was referred to, most of that was owned, maybe 85%, was owned by New England Development, a little bit by Sonesta, and believe it or not, a little bit by River Court, the apartment building on the other side of the street. Charles Park was a condition of the PUD. That's how we got the open space, even parts of the canal. It was part of the design review and part of the zoning guidance to do that. I wish we had zoning like that again. The orientation to the canal park was also one of the conditions. First Street, the city was never happy with First Street, although it was better than initially thought, and the rationale was New England development. Mr. Karp said, look, we're doing something unique at the arcade. I can't stretch that anymore. And to his credit, for many years, the 3 levels of retail was probably the most successful, or of the most successful in New England. So those are all true things. And and also Cambridge side place that goes through Charles Street wasn't there. We insisted on that, and that was because the end of the neighborhood then had access at least to get to Charles Park and theoretically go through Sonesta to the riverfront. That was the best we could do, but it was a lot of give and take, and I think everybody was proud of the end, knowing that it wasn't perfect, certainly from Mr. Karp's point of view, but also the city's. And the rationale to redesign that and make it stronger, I think we all agree. It's the amount that's necessary, and that's why I asked, please provide us with that rationale, why these numbers are needed. As far as parking goes, I have little doubt that the parking study will say, yes, you can make this work. The traffic study is another thing. And I think in one reason that's why we have the density proposed that we have proposed. I could be wrong, but I suspect one reinforces the other. I really question, if I remember correctly, there'll be 1,500 office lab tenants. I believe that was said, at least in passing, at the planning board hearing. I don't think that's going to make a huge difference on the retail mall. You know, lunches, sure. But actually residential supports retail 3 times more than office space. The bike safety, you know, having a cycle track for 2 blocks, then hell on wheels going in each direction, I question that. You know, if we could continue it, I'm all for it. But it's not part of the bike plan. It will be an even more congested road in the future. So I really question that. By the way, this building can be a mixed-use building. It's already been approved. It will be a mixed-use building, office on the 3rd floor. And we would certainly entertain any proposal to make it a mixed-use building. So I asked earlier, and I don't know if I have to make this an official request, but we really do need where you think this is going to end up. You can say office lab. We understand there's that question. How much retail will there be? And really, how much is there? Is it all the 600? I forgot the number of the existing building. I know it's in this. That's all retail now, including the department stores. So we really are reducing retail, but in this market, that I get that. That makes sense. But actually breaking it down, I actually don't think there's a lot of retail on First Street, but it would be curious to see those numbers. I still feel if we're going to set back buildings, and I applaud you, you should all know that we struggled even to get a 3-foot setback on First Street in the original design. And I was told that wouldn't happen, not by you, by others, not by New England Development, although you supported not doing it. And we've never been happy with that. So doing that is a major plus. There's no question. But I would say Sears should do the same thing then, or some moderation of all three blocks, all three pieces. Why do it on two? You say, well, Sears isn't going to be knocked down. Fine, modify the front of Sears. If we're doing this, let's do it. It doesn't help because at least the next building has an arcade, and then the building at the corner, there was no arcade, but enough on that. Just bear with me. You know, how tall is enough? I wish I could have added a few floors to my house, but, and I'm a good neighbor. People like me. This is different. I get that. Retail is an important entity. But we need more. To give an upzoning, you need more concrete information than this is what we can support by parking, or this is what we need to make the retail work. For instance, is the retail being subsidized by the lab offices? Will the retail costs be less? I didn't hear anything. I'm not suggesting that has to happen. I'm just saying nothing's been said, and I'm not asking you to say it now. Think about that. That might make it feel, all right, we get it. One use is helping to support another. Just let me look here. I know the projector's off, but you did show a different rendering or two in the planning board, which showed the Macy's Tower, if I could call it that, from Charles Park, but we didn't see it tonight. And people on the planning board said they had a different view when they saw that. And I don't know what it takes to start up the projector, but if you don't show it tonight or can't, we really should see it next time, because it really shows how large this is on the park. And the idea of the guidelines, which I'll be handing out in City Council, which are still the official guidelines for this area, even after all these years, pretty much talks about a human scale architecture along public open space. Now, I grant you it's on the north, and that's true, but should it be stepping back? You'll see what I mean. So I'm sure as soon as I leave my time here, I'm going to see something else, but I think that covered it all. I'm very concerned about labs. I'm very concerned about height. Why the tallest building, almost doubling the allowed height of the tallest in the area, should be here. I don't get it. I don't know why 85 feet, or maybe we're generous, 120 feet on Cambridge Side Place doesn't work. Nothing has told me that it would not work. And as far as foundations go, the higher you go, the more you have to dig through your garage to build that. So to me, there's a lot of questions. And the whole idea about the East Cambridge riverfront was to be sympathetic to the East Cambridge neighborhood. But things change, we get that. But how can we still be sympathetic, but in a bigger way, if you will? I do appreciate the character of the buildings presented. I know this isn't design review, but frankly, many buildings that the council approves zoning of afterwards were disappointed. And we're trying to ask you to show us the building, to show you how you mitigate height and density. And we're expecting that to be similar. It will change, but we're expecting that to be similar. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Councilor Siddiqui?
Thank you. My colleagues have covered many of the points. I concur on many of the issues. Particularly, I can't underscore enough that the city of Cambridge, we're in an affordable housing crisis, so 125,000 feet, it isn't enough. So, I'd really like to see more. I think this is going to be a cash cow. I hate that phrase, but I'd like this cash cow to be associated with as much housing as possible. On some of the mitigation, I'd like to add, I think you've mentioned here that it's, there's ongoing discussions, but community space, conference space for groups, I think that'd be very helpful. When we talk about retail, I don't want us to forget about affordable childcare space. The city is constantly looking for affordable childcare space. We don't have enough. So that's something I'd like us to consider. And then I think most of the last point, I think what's missing from the Galleria, Cambridge Side Galleria, it's my mall, I've grown up going to it, is some kind of entertainment. And I think that's what has worked at Assembly. I'm not talking about another AMC, I'm not talking about a Lucky Strike, but maybe a real arcade of some sort. Some entertainment. I think that is missing, and I think we have to bring it to this plan. So those are my comments. My colleagues have covered most of the points. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Mellon?
I love going last because I feel like everyone already, I was going to bring up the movie. I might be an outlier, but I mean, everybody talks about how great Assembly Row is, but the only reason I ever go there is to go to the movies. And then you go to a restaurant or you need a pair of shoes. There does need to be a draw. I think that's something to think about. What is going to be the draw? If it is going to be the neighborhood place where we're going to really want to bring people in and make it an experience. I think the good news is that you've heard a lot of consensus around what we like about the plan and what we would like you to go back to the drawing board on. I think the height has been talked about. I think that's probably the major issue of beyond I think when we were talking about it, people keep talking about the square feet of the housing, but I feel like it was 140 units, roughly. 120. So if we're talking about 20% of that is 24, but if we're talking about family size units, it's even less. So for 625,000 extra square feet to only get 20-ish units of affordable housing while we're in the middle of this affordable housing crisis, I think I would really like to challenge you guys to go back to the drawing board on that. I'd like to echo Mayor McGovern's point around, it's funny, when Sharon Zimmerman was up talking and talking about being supported, she's about to lose her space over here on Bishop Allen Drive with about 20 other nonprofits. And I think Councilor Zondervan, that's a great idea of thinking about a shared workspace. Working for a small nonprofit myself, we don't need a whole office, but it would be nice to have shared conference spaces, et cetera. And so having some kind of nonprofit space, affordable nonprofit space, would be a great thing. And I do want to kind of put a plug in for affordable office space in general. I know this is a really common concern. We've got a lot of startups that are here in Cambridge. They start out with 12 people or 20 people. They go to 60 or 80, and they cannot move. There's not a single office space that they can move into that they can afford. So we're losing a lot of our innovation startups across the river over into some more affordable places in Boston, if you can believe it. So thinking about affordable spaces, innovation spaces, startup tech spaces, I think would be a really good community benefit. And then just to Councillor Toomey's point, upgrading some of the open spaces, I think, would be a huge community benefit. I hadn't even considered thinking about the riverfront, if there's anything that can be done there. I know that it's DCR property, but if there's something that we can do over there, you're right. It's kind of a dead zone, and it could be a lot nicer. So anyways, I don't want to just belabor everyone else's point. I look forward to a longer process. I think what you heard tonight was there's a lot of consensus around what this plan can be. I'm excited about the idea of revitalizing First Street, but I think we need to do it in a thoughtful way. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone have any further comments? Councilor Carlone?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know you'll have some comments, but I'll be brief. I've spoken to people in Somerville, and sales are down at Assembly Row too. I'm sure you know that better than me. So retail, even at that kind of a place, is down. And I only go to there for movies as well. I haven't been to the arcade if there's one there. And as far as benefits go, it's too early to talk. We can talk about them conceptually. We have a policy order in that basically said $100 to $200 for every additional commercial foot. Now that depends on the use. A lab would be higher, or another use might be lower. The consulting assessor, our former assessor, is now looking at those numbers and will report to us. But this is what Boston does as well. So we can think of many things. The petitioner might even think of some things. I can tell you I've done drawings for a connection in front of the Museum of Science garage and leading to the Museum of Science. And years ago, when we first started talking, we talked about that connection as even helping the canal environment, because you could go into the Museum of Science on the water side, get stamped, go to the canal, come back later on after a break, and that just seems to work for everybody. The other thing in the East Cambridge plan was a public dock in front of Front Park, where that little platform is now getting renovated. I mean, those are things that would make sense and would be open to everybody. So things to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? So my feeling is we want to keep this in committee. Okay. So on that note, I'll adjourn the meeting, and everyone have a great evening.
What?